All right, so today I thought I'd try something a little more interesting than just being at school and making a video, but to put myself into the position that a lot of you guys are in, being at home, having to use stuff that you've got at home without the benefit of, well, a lot of the things that we have in the studio at school. And so I've got my little Tupperware with a kitchen sponge and a fork. And that's really kind of it. I don't think I need anything else for the demonstration today. We're going to discuss making a lid for your box. Now, there's a bunch of different ways you can make lids, and if you're interested, it's worth a Google to familiarize yourself with a couple of different types of lids. Ceramic box or ceramic lidded box would be one place to start. That's not an assignment or anything, but in case you're interested in some things that other people have done, it definitely is worth looking at. But what we are going to do today is kind of a specific adaptation of a lid to make something that's going to visually go with the box that you've made, because the boxes that you guys have made are somewhat unusual. Taking coils to make slabs to construct something is an unusual approach, but it creates some interesting artistic elements in a way that you wouldn't have been able to achieve otherwise. So what we'd like to do is something similar, in which we're going to create some interesting element features that can only be achieved by the way that we're actually going to build the lid for this box. So one of the first things you need to understand is that any kind of ceramic lid, whether it's a box lid or a jar lid or the lid to a canister or something like that, when you make it out of clay, the lid and the vessel have to sort of dry together. And so we want to keep, while we're working on this, we want to keep the boxes from drying out. Like I indicated last week multiple times, don't let your boxes dry completely out during this process while you're making your lid. And on the day that you make your lid, you're not going to be able to just pick it up and put it on your box. It's going to need to sort of sit and sort of harden a little bit before you can even pick it up and handle it at all. But that'll become pretty evident once we start to actually build it. So let me go through the description of what we're going to do. You're going to, similar to what you did with your boxes, you're going to create a boundary for the surface of the lid, and you're gonna actually build it out of pieces of clay that you assemble in place within the boundary that you draw. Pretty simple, but I want to go through it step by step so that you kind of understand some ways that it can go wrong. So if you were to look at your boxes, most of them from the top, they would look kind of like this. Okay, so you've got the four walls, and then you've got these coils on the corners that in many instances sort of protrude out from the corner. Okay, so the way that this lid is going to sit on here is that it's going to cover all the way out like this. And so it's going to hang a little bit off the edge, but it's going to come right out to the edge of these corners. And the way that we're going to figure out how to shape it like that is that you're going to, first of all, your box needs to be hard enough to pick it up and turn it upside down. If your box is not hard enough to pick it up and turn it upside down, you want to get it just hard enough in order to do that. Now, that's not necessarily letting it dry all the way out. That's letting it get to leather hard, to where it'll hold its shape. You can hold it and it doesn't flop or distort. You guys are familiar with what I'm talking about. But it's not like white and completely hardened. So you got to be able to pick it up, turn it upside down, so that the rim is facing a piece of paper where you're going to build your lid onto it. This is my example box. So you're going to put the box face down, or opening down on a piece of paper, and you're just going to mark the corners of where those coils are. Like that. And then you're going to take a straight edge, whether that's the edge of a notebook paper, or a notebook, or a box, or if you have one handy, a ruler. And you're going to connect the little marks that you've made to create your square. Now, the reason I'm not saying, measure out a 1/2 inch from 6 inches is because not everybody's box is square anymore. That's a given because it's made of clay. And not everybody's little corner pieces stick out the same distance. So the easiest way for everybody to be able to do this so that it works is just to mark the corners. Anyway, this is now the boundary within which I'm going to build this little lid. And now obviously this is smaller than what you're going to be working with, but the next thing I'm going to do is take lumps of clay and I'm going to just pull them into small pieces of varying sizes, like this. And I'm going to make a bunch of these. And then that's at least enough for me to get started. And then the first thing I'm actually going to put down on here is a little handle in the middle, okay? And all of the assembly around it is going to it'll surround this handle. So what I want to make sure is that the handle is kind of tall enough in order to be able to be grabbed with the other stuff around it. So I know that doesn't make any sense to you right now watching, but it will in a minute. So I'm going to take a plug of clay like this, and you can design this however you want. But I'm going to make it nice and simple and make a knob. And I am sure that you guys could come up with something a little more interesting looking than this, but this will work. Function is important. So I'm going to put this guy right in the middle, just like this. Kind of press it down real good. All right, and then I'm going to surround this with little elements built up from the surface. But before I do that, we all know that this is going to require scoring. And I saw a lot of you last week working on things in the studio, on the projects that we have going in the studio, working on things, putting things together without adding water or without scoring or without pressing things together. And there's really no way for me to stress enough that if you don't follow the steps, the 3 steps to joining clay together, and they are scoring, adding water, and then adding pressure when you press the pieces together. If you don't do those 3 things, I promise you on my life that they will fall apart. There's no way for me to express this with a greater degree of gravity for ceramics class, that if you don't take those steps to actually get your pieces to stay stuck together, they will not stay stuck together. And your project, and I mean this as kindly as possible, is not some sort of miracle that is going to subvert all the rules of ceramics glass that have been in place, in memoriam from the beginning of time. If you don't score, add water, and press your pieces of clay together, they just won't stick. I promise. So the next thing I'm going to do, rant off, I apologize, is I'm going to make little spikes. And I'm going to build this lid out of a bunch of little spikes. So they kind of, spikes is one way to put it. They kind of look like little elongated Hershey's Kisses, if you want to think about it that way. And if you want to come up with something different than this that you can assemble, I'm open to suggestion. But this is the example that I'm going to show you because I feel like I can really highlight a lot of interesting I can highlight some interesting elements using spikes. So once I have a bunch of these, I can start building. Okay, now that I've got what I think is going to be enough of these little spikes to fill up this square, I have to go and score the edges at the base of all the little spikes like this. And then set them to the side. Because they're going to join together at the base. All the way around. Okay, now that I've got all of my pieces scored and ready to have water applied and put together, well, that's what I'm going to start doing. So basically, it can go together pretty quickly. Just have to wet the score marks and begin putting pieces in place. So I'm going to just give each one a nice press, and you can even just dip them in water. And I'm going to start putting them together kind of in rings. We'll see how this turns out. I probably have more of these than I need, but much better than not having enough. Now, if you make it a little bigger than your square, that's okay. We were able to trim down all of the slabs to make perfect squares. For at least the way that I'm putting this one together, I'm not gonna be able to do that, to chop these. But if it's a little bigger and you have some little shapes hanging off the edge, I'm gonna go out on a limb and say that's just fine. As you can see, this sort of takes on an interesting kind of character when you put these pieces together like this. And actually, I may need more, it looks like. Oh yeah, gonna need more. My paper's starting to rip, and that's okay. I'm gonna just keep going with it. And then I think I need like 3 or 4. Okay. Scoring. I got lots faster at making these. I sort of did several. Compression is really, really important. Because if you don't press these things together, they will definitely not stay. Actually need more. 2. Soaking wet. That's all right. I'm going to try to square this up a little bit just by kind of pressing with my hands. I'm going to get this ridiculous piece of paper out of the way. And I've basically got my square. And this will cover the top of my box. And that's really what I'm concerned with right now. But the last thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to lay some of these little tips down. Well, all of them really, but not completely. Just so that they're sort of like leaning. And I'm going to do it gradually and in a spiral shape to create some movement. And I'm doing the outsides first. And I'm doing it in such a way that if I get any little cracks where I fold them out like that, I can just smooth it with my fingers. Maybe a little water on there. And I'm going to bend them a little more. Go around one more time. And then I'm going to work my way in towards the center. And bend those out kind of over the ones on the rim. And that's going to do a couple of things. This is creating some really interesting movement. And it's getting the points out of the way of the knob. So it has a functional aspect to it, folding them over does, as well as an aesthetic aspect to it. So I kind of get these like little laid down points that at this point I can kind of gently start to kind of smoosh into place, but I'm not pressing them together. I'm just kind of trying to get them to where the points aren't sticking straight up in harm's way, because there's no way that I could pick this up and handle it, because I'm going to need to put a flange on the bottom, and I'll talk about that in another video once everybody has this together. But in essence, this is kind of what you should be shooting for. I would applaud your efforts if you came up with a different thing to assemble other than a little spike. You could use just blobs, you could use any number of different shapes or forms. And I encourage you to experiment a little bit with this, have fun with it. This is supposed to be interesting to look at in a different way than the sides. So be creative with it. Or if you feel like this is really kind of something interesting to you and you want to go with it just like this, go with it just like this. And also you can be more creative with the knob than I was with this one. But I'm interested to see what you guys come up with, and I'm really excited about these boxes.